Yay! Hey everyone, welcome to Coda HQ. Thank you so much for coming. It's super exciting because this is actually the very first meetup that's ever happened here. So, second meetup, but at this new location. So, yeah, super stoked to have you. And we've got a really rad panel here tonight, and gonna have some really valuable convos. I'm sure you've already met lots of great people, so we'll have more of that mingling afterwards. So I'm gonna throw it over to Brandon.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Sweet. Cool. So I'm Brandon Case. I'm the first engineering hire at Coda. I'm the moderator of this panel. It's my first time moderating, so get excited for it to be horrible, but hopefully, hopefully it'll be decent. Yeah, and you know, this panel is amazing, and I want to talk as little as possible so that they can, you know, enlighten us with their awesome opinions. So, yeah. First, we'll just go around and, you know, John, you can start off introducing ourselves.
Cool, yeah. John Allen, disarmed bombs in the military for 5 years, then transferred to UC Berkeley, co-founded blockchain at Berkeley. When I graduated, co-founded Dekrypt Capital. Now I get to work with really passionate, people who are kind of trying to change the world. So it's the best job in the world, and yeah, absolutely love the space. Been in it since 2013. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm Jackson Blazensky. I do protocol research at the Graph. We index public blockchains and allow them to be queryable in a safe and easy way. And I work on a little bit of cryptography, have background in mathematics, and just really lucky to be here and happy this is happening.
Hi, I'm Zaki. I work on Tendermint and Cosmos, among other things, and I've been mostly working on sort of test nets and community and launch over the last year. What I've been most interested in is like the process of like educating people on the internet how to use your software, which is like sort of the hard and challenging part about, like making cryptocurrencies work.
My name is Vanishree. I'm a cryptographer. I work at Owen Labs, and I'm working on cryptography aspects of Coda.
I'm Izaak. I'm CTO at Owen Labs, and I also work on engineering and cryptography things with Vanishree and Brandon.
Okay, awesome. So while you have the mic, Izaak, let's start. So this is a panel on cryptography and cryptocurrency. So I'm going to start us off on the more cryptocurrency side of things. Basically, one thing that I find interesting is that Bitcoin and some of the more classic cryptocurrencies are really attached to proof of work. They're like proof of work or die. But the newer protocols and even Ethereum are moving to proof of stake protocols. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on the trade-offs of these? And yeah, why don't you start us off?
Well, it's interesting that you say proof of work or die, because I think it's more like proof of work and die. No. All jokes aside, I guess maybe I would say, I don't think there was anything bad in the heart of Satoshi when they wrote this aspect of Bitcoin or whatever, or in the heart of I don't know, Cynthia Dvorak and I don't remember who the other person on the paper was with this hashcash thing, but or the proof of work for emails or whatever it was. But there's sort of two things. One, like at the time there were no sort of credible alternatives, I guess, to proof of work for like consensus in an open setting. But now we have very credible alternatives, which are and by that I mean, of course, proof of stake based schemes, which are more secure in almost every sort of real world scenario. We've seen real world 51% attacks on smaller proof of work chains, and B, don't require you to burn the energy of like a whole Switzerland. And I guess I would say, and that's just today. And one could imagine if there were like a super Bitcoin for everyone future, it's not just a Switzerland. The energy consumption is proportional to the price of the currency. So it's like a, it's even more than a Switzerland. It's hard to think about.
Cool. Zaki, do you have thoughts?
So my main thoughts on this are so I guess what's terrifying to me is I think the amount of the total value of cryptocurrencies that will migrate to proof of stake this year. There have certainly been proof of stake cryptocurrencies before, but 2019 is kind of the year where this all starts to really be put to the test. And I've certainly done my part. I just finished this thing called Game of Stakes, which was the first attempt to do an adversarial incentivized proof of stake testnet, where you run proof of stake in kind of pathological conditions and see what happens. And coming out of that experience, I'm feeling extremely confident that this will actually work. But this is the year where the rubber meets the road.
Cool. Awesome. John, I think you probably have something to say.
I mean, I think it's just interesting, maybe a little bit of a counterpoint, because I think Sunny from Cosmos, I think, said something that was very interesting to me and really kind of resonated in that proof of work, I think really excels at the minting process and kind of at that distribution. I think as far as kind of making things that are efficient and functional and can kind of scale to the needs that we need to, I think that there's amazing opportunity in proof of stake. But maybe to back up a little bit from a high level, you have to kind of understand that the whole point of all these projects is kind of a technical problem, a technical solution to a social problem, and that you're trying to replace these trusted, intermediaries, these trusted institutions. So the way in which you construct your network, and the way in which you, distribute your coins, tokens, and the way that you derive consensus is very much part of that. And so I think just some of my concern is seeing all these people rushing to proof of stake, and maybe they have 5 people who are holding 60, 70% of the tokens, and then it becomes a concern for people to engage with that network and have it become a standard, because then it's maybe do I trust these people? You have more of kind of this republic, which we already have in the existing world, and you have your kind of trade-offs with that. So I think it's a very interesting topic. I don't really have a strong opinion either way, but yeah.
I think it's, I guess I would agree with you that it's extremely important to make sure it's not 5 people who have 60% of the tokens, replicate our existing reality or whatever. But I mean, what is Bitcoin? It's or let me not say Bitcoin, but okay, Bitcoin, for example. It's what? Who gets the tokens? Bitmain? You know what I mean? So it's kind of it's long are gone the days that you can turn on your laptop and get a Bitcoin or whatever, right? So, right, yeah, right. So, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's not obvious to me that prove yeah, I don't know.
I wanna address one thing that you mentioned, John. I forget how you worded it, but you were saying the consensus mechanism is in service of replacing these institutions, basically. And I guess I want to hear your thoughts on whether or not these proponents of cryptocurrencies claim that they can sort of create these truly free markets, free from government, free from everyone. Is that a good thing?
A lot to unpack there, right? For me, I think having that optionality is something that's really meaningful. I think if you look at kind of a lot of these current events, you kind of have these ingrained institutions, and they kind of allow access, or their morality, or their ethics, or their shareholders kind of define how and who can engage with these systems. And a lot of times that excludes kind of a lot of individuals. And I think there's the potential to include people and to give people kind of that sovereignty and that agency is really powerful. With that is that double-edged sword, right? There's a reason why you have these very strict and stringent institutions, because it's they'd rather defer to being much more conservative and not have bad and nefarious things happen, as opposed to kind of including everyone, having all these great opportunities happen, but maybe some people do bad things with it. That being said, I mean, I think if you look at kind of a lot of these banks and institutions, just fine after fine after fine, and I still think that for nefarious things, a $100 bill is still going to reign supreme for the foreseeable future. So I don't know. It's a Maybe that didn't directly answer your question, but I think it's good and bad, if that makes sense. But I definitely think that the trade-off's worthwhile to pursue it and develop it. So.
Cool. Cool. Awesome. Um, does anyone else have a strong opinion about that?
Well, so I guess the sort of thought process that I have is that like what we're doing is we're sort of like increasing the access to secure computers, and secure computers plus cryptocurrencies are like the same thing as markets. So we will see all of the good and all of the bad of markets at scale, and so it will both be awesome and suck.
Izaak, I think, has.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say that the whether it is good or bad is dependent on what we currently have, right? I think in the situations like what has been happening in Venezuela, where there is over 60% inflation rate, the variance we see in Bitcoin is a godsend, right? So and that the freedom it gives for them is definitely useful. So I think it's in the perspective of what we currently have and what are the problems and what are the problems it solves.
But I also want to push. I would say I agree with what you were saying, and also to build on that, there are some very legitimate things that it helps with, like people who are shut out from existing banking infrastructure and so on, sex workers, et cetera. But to push back on what Zaki said, like I think it's like to say that like cryptocurrencies can only be markets or whatever, I think is like, this is like, maybe our curse in neoliberalism that we're cursed to think that markets are the end all and be all of any relationship between people or whatever, but like it doesn't have to be that way. And I think one thing that's really interesting and underexplored about cryptocurrency is the potential to enable different social dynamics beyond markets, simply markets. I think that's just happens to be what was the metaphors that were closest to people's minds so far, and so are the first things that people have looked at. But I don't think that's the only thing you can do in the setting where you can you have this public stateful computation. It's much more general.
Okay, sweet. Let's change gears. Go to more cryptography. I mispronounced that. Okay, so you have the microphone already, Vanishree. So okay, in the past, we've really only seen applications of really primitive crypto systems. And it hasn't really been until like blockchains that we've seen these more advanced cryptographic systems that academia has been discovering. So what specifically about blockchain sort of drives this in your mind?
Right, you're right in that until just a few years ago, it was just maybe encryption and DocuSign using signatures and e-voting and what else? Maybe just very simple cryptography that was being used, and now there are zero-knowledge proofs and ZK snarks and ZK starks, and there are companies that are looking at homomorphic encryption and whatnot. But anyway, that's beyond blockchain. So I think to answer your question, there are two aspects. I think there are a couple of aspects to security or and cryptography specifically, which have been holding back these technologies from seeing the day of light, but those two aspects don't hold so strongly when it comes to blockchain. And those two aspects, I think, are in the case of security. So typically, more security means less usability, right? So products usually try to over-index on usability to ensure wider adoption. That'll mean good, higher security technologies don't see the day of light. That's not the case in blockchain. In blockchain, many a times, it may be fair to say that security is more important than usability in a way. because your money or other important assets are at stake. And the other aspect is that when you're a cryptographer and you're looking for problems to solve, you look at a problem and you try to solve it with cryptography techniques, right? But it turns out that many problems, many threat models can be secured against with just simple system solutions. For example, there was this thing in cryptography called anonymous credentials, and I think whatever you could achieve with this cryptographic technique called anonymous credentials, you could do with a trusted third party. And a trusted third party is not always bad, right? So there was this trusted third party central system solution which could do what it could have done. But that's not the case when we consider blockchain, because here the core objective is to let go of a centralized third party. And we don't know how to do things without crypto that we have been doing with, by crypto I mean cryptography, without cryptography.
Cool. Yeah, you make some really good points. The one thing that I want to focus in on, because I think maybe Jackson will have a comment on, is you mentioned that a lot of times people tend to focus more on usability than security, and maybe we have to focus for cryptocurrencies, we have to care more about security. But I wonder, does that, if we don't have users and it's really secure, that's still sort of a problem. So I guess, so for Jackson, how important do you think usability is? I know the graph protocol is doing some stuff there, but.
Can everyone? Okay, here we go. Yeah, usability is super important. I think there seems to be a bit of a flip with what we're used to. Often in new industries, cryptography comes really late. Like people push out new features, they want to get new customers, a new industry is being created, and then later on, we make it secure. In the blockchain space, it seems to be a bit reversed, that some of the cryptography comprises the feature set. Some of the cryptography, like nobody will show up unless they believe that it's secure. So there seems to be a flip. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, there seems to be a flip that cryptography is like a first-class set of features, and so it's a bit backwards than what we're used to. So
interesting, John. I wonder if you've seen any. I'm sure like lots of companies talk to you because they're trying to raise money and or whatever. I wonder if you've seen well, one, like, how do you feel about usability being an important thing when you're evaluating companies, but also like,
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, because like usability is everything. I think like you have a lot of technical individuals building products for other technical individuals, and in order to kind of bring on the masses, like you have to make it much more approachable, right? And I think every time you interact with a lot of these platforms, you kind of see how early stage it is, which is definitely fine. That being said, I think that making concessions on certain things just to make it functional or to get more throughput or other things like that, like usually I kind of look at this like decentralization, trustlessness, immutability. Those are the kind of like 3 metrics that I think are very important, because once you start making concessions on those to get more throughput or higher TPS, then you start to get on this kind of spectrum of centralization. And if you're trying to kind of be 10x better than what already exists, if you're trying to compete in the same plane, I think that's begins to get problematic. So I really focus on the things that are uniquely blockchain. And I think it's been really interesting in this kind of like bear market that people are starting to realize that, like before it was, hey, I can do all these things, I can tweak this, I can iterate and change all these things, but people are really starting to find kind of what is uniquely blockchain, what is defensible, especially with a lot of these kind of incumbents coming in and making their own kind of tweaks or their own kind of designs of something that's crypto-like. As you've seen kind of in the media with like JP Morgan coin and a lot of other like large tech companies kind of creating these things.
Yeah, how do you feel about JP Morgan's coin?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. I mean, it's like I've known about it for a while, because I mean, like it's interesting, and I think it's really important right now maybe to draw a dichotomy between kind of digital currency and cryptocurrency, because what JP Morgan built is very much a digital currency. It's not really revolutionary. It's some kind of like iteration. It's interesting. Like if you have like Venmo or PayPal or you have sent gold on World of Warcraft, then you probably had a very similar interaction. So, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense for them, but it's in this walled garden. It's in this silo, right? Like you deposit money into their bank account, they create this kind of digital token that you can transfer within that system. If you want to withdraw the fiat, then you can transfer it from their bank account. So it's a closed system. It's crazy to me that it was so inefficient before, and they're just now kind of adopting this. But yeah, I mean, I'm not very impressed. I think it makes sense. I think it's like great for them. It shows that crypto has caused this competition, that people aren't okay with these 3-5 day settlements. They want that instantaneous transaction. I mean, there's 30 other countries right now that have instant national settlement for bank transfers. I mean, love that competition is kind of enforcing that in the United States, where you haven't really had that competition. So.
Cool. I wonder, on the Cosmos side, you're working with Zaki a lot of different blockchain technologies. How I just lost my train of thought. But how do you? So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're working with some like private blockchains that maybe aren't as decentralized, and some more public ones. Is that right? Or anyway, take it away.
Sure. I mean, so the vision of Cosmos, which is like composition between like sort of community and application specific blockchains. So like sort of the sort of core vision of Cosmos is that in general people don't want just one blockchain. Like the natural size of a blockchain has like some sort of limit of how many people can like agree and coordinate their behavior. You see like how hard it is at this point to like coordinate an Ethereum upgrade, and it's like that's like a community of maybe 10,000 people. Imagine like trying to coordinate 1 billion people. So like we had this. So the vision of Cosmos is, smaller units of blockchain that like compose together into one giant ecosystem. So that vision can tolerate and accept and interact with private blockchains. It's going to be sort of interesting to see, because we are seeing enterprise uptick in Tendermint. Like we are starting to see like more sort of like traditional corporate interest in BFT systems. But I can't imagine why you would actually want that if you don't want to actually like custody like crypto or digital assets in those systems. So it's going to be interesting to see like whether or not they're actually going to be whether or not that's the bridge. Like first you start out with your private blockchain, then you make it BFT, then you connect it to a world of bearer assets and other kinds of assets, and you exchange value back and forth. That seems like a potentially plausible sort of narrative about how like these ecosystems get put together. But the only indicator I really see in it is sort of probably the first like genuine interest in BFT from a lot of the sort of private and enterprise blockchain community.
I think Izaak, you maybe have a reaction to that. Okay, sorry, I misread your facial expression. Cool. Okay, so here's a question. A lot of this blockchain stuff has been overhyped, I guess. But I wonder what we can just go around the panel. But what do you think is underhyped, either in a particular cryptocurrency protocol, something in the space, or in on the cryptography side? Yeah, we'll start with John. Sorry. Putting you on.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really strong emphasis in privacy. Kind of drank the Kool-Aid, so I very much think that it is underhyped. I think it's starting to kind of catch on, but there's so much more potential there. I mean, like looking like companies like Coda who are using it for succinctness qualities, right? That's something that's interesting. Everyone thinks it's just for privacy, but then you can start to see that because of kind of the construction of these things, you can get so many other qualities. So shilling a little bit, my partner recently just published a couple of papers, right? And it's kind of showing that you can do a lot of computation off chain and then just kind of validate that on chain. And it's showing that rather than trying to kind of like make these smaller subsets to get efficiency gains, you can kind of use these different cryptographic techniques that way you don't have to give away any of that decentralization or trustlessness, but you can get that increased throughput for like batch transactions. You can kind of verify this computation, and then you're not dealing with kind of a distributed system scalability problem. You're just kind of like throwing a lot of compute power at one problem and then just verifying that in a distributed way, which is kind of how I see a lot of these things progressing. So that's something that I find interesting. Is just like Yeah.
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is that the space is really good at the securitization of digital property rights. I know we talked earlier about the distribution of who gets to hold on to these assets, but the fact that it's really hard to take them away is one that's undervalued, and that also relates to being able to execute contracts and send property rights past borders. I mean, like all the problems with interjurisdictional law, being able to do stuff seamlessly across borders, I still think we're going to see a lot of that develop in the next few decades. Another one that I think is underrated is like the compression facet of snarks and the zero knowledge landscape. I know we'll probably get to a lot of that perhaps tonight, but this notion that you can like double check exponentially faster with like this cryptographic proof rather than kind of double checking it yourself, I think that has like many implications, compressing state machines and stuff like this. So I think that's still very undervalued. Yeah.
One of the things I think is sort of underhyped is a little bit as more and more things that I like about both Tendermint and Coda Protocol is they have so far produced like actual engineering. Like there's like an actual like a real thing that you can run on your computer that does a thing that has never been done before, which is nice. But I think there's going to be a fairly extensive like sort of remix culture that emerges out of all of these technologies as people like, oh, take bits and pieces of things that actually work and start gluing them together outside of like the systems architecture that like we sort of decided was the right one. And that I think is, so like, I think the extent to which like we are building foundations and that there will be people who come after us that do unexpected things with those foundations are largely underhyped relative to lots of people who are sort of like, okay, I will build the next foundational piece.
I think compatibility between blockchains is kind of underhyped. I think it's pretty critical going forward.
I guess one thing that I would say is underhyped, or maybe it's not underhyped, but because it's a bad thing, but it's something that more people ought to be aware of, which is like I think there are still a lot of people who believe that like if you send something on Bitcoin, it's private. So it's really not. Like if you send something on Bitcoin, like literally everyone can see it. Or like basically any cryptocurrency except for, in some cases Zcash, but then a lot of times people think that they're sending Zcash privately and they're not, and so that's also bad. So that I would say is underhyped, and also how bad proof of work is.
I won't dig into that more yet. Why don't we start doing questions? So I guess just here, now you can hear me. Raise your hand if you have a question, and we can get the mic to you. I guess I'll do it. Actually, you should keep the mic.
And yes, and then I'll.
Hi, I'd like to get your reaction to something I learned yesterday. Actually, 2 days ago. So it was somebody who was around in the 90s and was being kind of pompous about that, as one is. And he was saying, this isn't a decentralization movement. This is a open source software movement because we're naive, because open source software hasn't really finished happening yet. And wow, we're really getting there now.
Cool. Zaki?
So I don't know. I've been saying this recently. Like, what's kind of fun about the vibe of cryptocurrencies is it's open source software, the open source software culture, plus the VC culture, plus Asian gambling culture. Like, so it's like the financialization of open source software essentially is what it is, which like seemed like a thing that it would eventually happen. And so that's kind of like what makes this fun.
Any questions?
All All right, very fun, lighthearted question. So you could argue that poor cryptography lost World War II for the Germans and the Japanese. How do we use good cryptography to prevent World War III?
That's a great question. Does anyone have thoughts on that? Isaac?
I guess I would say, like, I think it's like a misguided, like, one shouldn't look for technical answers to political questions, or like be very like you know, like, this is like a classic, like, I think thing that has been done many times, of like believing that technology can save people from like political questions. Like, you can't, like, it can't. I don't know. But it is true that there are some high-profile cases where like cryptography had a big, I guess, impact on material reality. So, huh? No, I don't know. Like, oh, tell them to like dismantle the military. No, that, I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, like, the way you prevent World War III is you take money, like, you take money from central banks, and then, like, I don't think if like the dollar wasn't the reserve currency of the world, you wouldn't have $5 trillion worth of war over the last 20 years.
I think you have the causality backwards.
Really? Like, so, like, you think taking money away from central banks will cause wars?
Sorry, I think the dollar is the reserve currency.
But go ahead.
Well, okay. I don't feel so. I mean, I'm not an economist. You know, I won't make such a strong claim, but my understanding is that, you know, in large part, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world because of an advantageous strategic position that the U.S. found itself in, you know, after the Second World War, in terms of military power. But you know, and being able to sort of you know, ask politely to other countries to you know, anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of resonate with your point that, like, it's not necessarily going to solve it. I was gonna say, like, brief aside, totally unrelated. Like, one of my really close friends is an international student, and she's just extremely passionate about crypto and wanted to get her, you know, like, master's, PhD in cryptography, and she's not allowed to because she's an international student. So that was just very interesting to me. You know, it like really brings you back to like World War I, World War II, when you realize that cryptography very much can be a tool that can be used kind of for or against the benefit of a country. But yeah, I mean, I think like as far as like preventing World War III, a lot of this is kind of that mutually assured destruction. I think like one of my favorite macro jokes is like, if I owe you $80, it's my problem. If I owe you $1 trillion, it's your problem. That's kind of the world that we live in today. Like, everyone owes everyone so much money that it can't be a world war. You have a lot of these proxy wars in other countries, and a lot of people kind of funding other groups and sides, and that's just kind of the way of the world. And we spent a lot of money on war, but there hasn't been that direct, massive, large-scale conflict. I don't necessarily know if cryptocurrency could play a role in that, but I think there are some kind of economic incentives you could set. You know, you could imagine a entire country's GDP being slashed if they do something nefarious, right? Like,
yeah, in the back, I guess. We need to get more microphones in this venue, clearly.
So if you could ask Satoshi one question, what question would you ask him or her?
You have the mic. No.
I mean, personally, I think it's kind of cool that he just kind of stepped away and is no longer involved. I think a lot of people have been kind of these like calls to like, you know, how do we solve scalability, Satoshi? Come back just this one time. And really, for this kind of dream to be realized, it's can't have this kind of, you know, own network, can't have this person who, you know, built it, and that way they have this undue influence just because they were there since the beginning. I think kind of like releasing it to everyone else. I mean, I think it would be cool just to talk to him and kind of see the motivation, just because, you know, in order to design something like this, you have to have such an interdisciplinary kind of approach and like a really interesting perspective. So I think just like from a general conversation of, you know, what was the motivation, what was the dream behind this would be interesting. But I like that it kind of persists and thrives because you can't ask questions and can't ask what the original goal or intent was.
Yeah, I'd probably leave him alone, to be honest. He probably maybe wants to be left alone. There's a lot of his surviving conversation from the past that we can dig into. Like, I'm sure all of us haven't read 100% of what he's written, so there's a lot to read from what he wrote originally. And yeah, something tells me maybe he's a little introverted, so I'd probably leave him alone.
I just like to know, again, like more of the thought process behind the anonymity and the OPSEC, because I've recently come to the conclusion that if you wanted to build, if you want to build money, it must be founded anonymously. Like anything that really is going to be money in this like new world based on all these technologies that we're building will have like no obvious parent and no person that you can like point to and be like, that's the guy who founded the cryptocurrency. But I'm kind of curious, the biggest aspect of curiosity is like, how did you come to that analysis? Like, given the fact that like we didn't know any of this before.
Also private key. So, and also, it's not obvious to me that Satoshi's a man. That's the other thing I would say.
My name is Fode. Thank you for the great panel. I have a question. Sorry, I forgot your name, the cryptographer. Speaking of hype, you mentioned that maybe going forward, what is Underhyped actually is like interoperability between blockchains. So besides Cosmos, what can we do moving forward for the existing blockchains to be more interoperable? Sorry, I can't say the word. Just come like a few drinks in. But how do we make sure that basically we have because right now there seems to be like a lot of hype on submarine swaps, atomic swaps, and so some kind of like cross blockchain kind of transactions. But what can we do like right now moving forward to make sure that we can communicate between different blockchains?
I guess it's just by design, right? So I guess it just comes down to keeping that in mind while designing. If there are applications where you're targeting things like there are multiple blockchains that are interacting, right? If you could already envision that, and I think through design and things that enter into the blockchain, making that as not too much structure in what enters into the blockchain, just key value pairs. I don't know.
Jackson, sorry.
The problem also exists in the zero knowledge space, where a lot of certain types of proofs are not necessarily compatible with other types of proof systems. So there are some standardization efforts, like there's a zero knowledge proof standardization working group, I think. A lot of the folks are out of Israel, out of Berkeley. And so I think like some of these systems are based on totally different kinds of mathematics. So even getting people in the same room, hitting the same whiteboard, discussing, how can we standardize certain procedures, certain proving and verification procedures, even agreeing on the same type of math is also hard. So I think just people getting in a room together, convening, who are really brilliant and hashing things out is going to be really important.
I wonder, Zaki, if you could just speak to what Cosmos is doing with the inter-blockchain protocol, if that.
Yeah, well, so there are basically like three sort of basic pieces of blockchain interoperability, as far as I can tell. So one piece of it is sort of fast finality consensus protocols, because this sort of like gives you this like BFT computer that you can program general computation into. Then the next piece of it is like efficiently verifiable consensus algorithms. So like most consensus algorithms that people are building are generally efficiently verifiable, but like some things like Algorand, for instance, like the number of tricks you have to pull to make them efficiently verifiable is like relatively large. So people have sometimes not paid enough attention to that when they design protocols. And then the third piece actually turns out, I'm pretty sure, is price feeds. So like one of the biggest biggest sort of things that people don't really appreciate in all of the interoperability protocols is when you have multiple assets, those assets have some spread between them, and if you want to interoperate between them or like move those assets between systems, you have to understand like what is that spread relative to collateral, or what is that spread relative to counterparty, and that seems to be like probably the scarcest resource in cryptocurrencies today, and I'm kind of hoping to fix that, sometime in 2019.
So I have a Coda specific question, and it's about mobile. So mobile is not the focus of blockchain as of now, because blockchains are too big. So with Coda, you have like a tiny fixed size, not really a blockchain, but a proof of a blockchain, right? A verifiable proof. So will it have like any impact on will Coda bring like blockchain to mobile?
I can say something. So, I think there's sort of two places that I think are. So I guess let me say three things. Like one, I think even on desktop, it's a huge usability improvement over, starting your command line Bitcoin D and waiting a day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever to get your hundreds of gigabytes. But yeah, it's also cool because you can really easily build into mobile applications, or even like include sort of the whole functionality of the blockchain, like as a JavaScript script tag or whatever. So I think that's the other cool place is having it just totally integrated like on a website. Like, oh, you want to accept crypto payment on your website, you can have the whole block, like the whole full node, like just running in the website.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
This is a monkey wrench into the whole business. There's one word that's conspicuously missing: ethics. Why is that?
Sorry, ethics. Thanks. What specifically about ethics?
Nobody talks about it.
Okay, let's talk about it.
I think I mentioned it a few times. I think maybe not, but I alluded maybe to proof of work. Like you want to do something unethical, start a proof of work cryptocurrency. I don't know. So, for example.
Ooh.
Well, I don't know. Anyway, I suppose it could be debated, but let me not say more.
Can you repeat the question, because there was some noise and I couldn't understand what the question was.
The question is basically like, why aren't we talking more about ethics
Around cryptocurrencies.
I mean, I suspect that there will be quite a bit of harm from the work over the last couple of years. I think the good will outweigh the harm, but like the harm is there, and I'm very like conscious of it. Like you create some like powerful tools that exist as public goods, and I have no control over what people will do with them. Like there are a lot of terrible ideas that you can build with this technology. I'm kind of glad that like Basis gave up, but like that's definitely like the most evil idea.
Why?
And why?
Yeah. Speak more about that.
Well, like, I remember talking about like seigniorage-backed cryptocurrencies with Vitalik in like 2014, and it was definitely like at the time like still an idea that is too evil to build, which is like because you can build these systems that are like perpetual motion machines of money until they run out of gas, and then there's nothing left. And like at some scale, like this will bankrupt nations and cause like breadlines. Like that's this like you can do this, and like we have these like powerful incentive engines that can like coordinate the behavior of thousands and tens of thousands of millions of people. Like that can easily be used for evil. Like you can set up like these like self-enforcing incentive systems that like can incentivize arbitrary behavior. I can think of lots of evil things to do with that. Like I don't know. So like I've spent the last couple of years building engines for doing this. I'm pretty sure that it'll be used for evil. Hopefully for good, but they'll definitely be used for evil.
On a less scary note, one of the best ideas I've heard on ethics is actually one that kind of favors the engineering mindset, and it's a notion called ethical scaling. It's not my idea. It's at least I heard about it from Nassim Taleb, and this is a notion that certain ethics make sense at different scale. So, the joke is like, with my family, I'm a communist. With my community, I'm a socialist. With my neighborhood or my state, I'm a Democrat. And with my country, I'm a Republican. And there's a scale to it, and it's kind of a funny idea. But, these networks, the idea is that they're going to get a lot bigger and they're going to grow. And so perhaps certain ethical considerations or design decisions are going to not make sense as things get 10 times bigger. So I think it's okay to have an engineering mindset on ethics as well. And then I just add another note, which is there seems to be this kind of belief that there's more white hats in the community and in the world, and that's the hope. There's more white hats, and I think a lot of this has to do with the total amount of mind share that's being put towards good things. And so that's why it's important we talk about ethics at the dinner table and on the panel, so there's more mind share on the good. And I'll leave it with one more thing that's related, and that is that I think physics could care less about ethics. Anyone can make a bomb. But I think somehow I'm convinced that mathematics favors the good. And I think that has a lot to do with being able to add more mind share that hopefully is good towards creating mathematics that enable more freedoms for folks. So, yeah.
Great. Izaak is...
Oh, yeah. So, first, I just want to push back on what you said, because maybe in some countries you stop being a communist with your family, but this is definitely a political. I mean, you're advancing a political point by saying one ought to stop being a communist with one's family, right? So first of all, I would just say that and be very, very aware of kind of what politics one is propagating with the things that one calls ethical. And I guess the other thing is I would just say, like, in terms of ethics in general, everyone in the world, whether you're working on technology or not, has an enormous ethical responsibility to the world. Your actions affect other people. You need to be cognizant, and to the extent that you can, try and do the most good. Try and figure out what good means to you. Don't necessarily listen to other people, or maybe do listen to other people, but think about it very hard. And but again, at the end of the day, decisions are not made by technologies; they're made by people. So the people need to be ethical. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, there's a lot of technical conversations that maybe happen behind closed doors, and maybe they should be a little bit more forward, just because a lot of this technology very quickly gets to that double-edged sword of ethical or not. You see people are talking about kind of this continuity of identity, and it's amazing because it allows you to have kind of an identity that then you can participate in kind of a lot of different systems. You can participate in markets, you can get a bank account, things like this. But then you look at kind of like Black Mirror with the nosedive episode, and then very shortly after, China kind of having this universal credit score, if you will, right? And so it's like having that static identity that you can't get away from no matter what. That sounds kind of awful when you implement it like that. I think it's interesting from the privacy perspective, just as far as kind of that pseudo-anonymity. It's very problematic if you have somebody who can be able to track that. I mean, you look at Chainalysis, they're getting lots of investments from government agencies, and you can glean a lot from these public blockchains. So the more things that you put on it, the more problems it is. And I think one of my favorite kind of phrases is Coin Center just published a paper and took a very bold stance on kind of privacy. And it was just that a cashless society is a surveillance society. So if a lot of these kind of cryptocurrencies or things that we create are going to try to take the place of cash, having that be private is a necessity in their opinion. I tend to agree with that, but then you also have to accept that that could be used for bad things. And is that appropriate trade-off? And I think there's going to be a lot of debate around that. So.
Great. Okay, now applause. Great. Yeah. So yeah, I just want to thank John, Jackson, Zaki, Vanishree, Izaak for being here. Hopefully I didn't bomb too hard as a moderator. I think we got some interesting conversations out of it. And of course I want to thank Mani for planning this event and making sure that it happened and everything. Thank Avery is doing the Twitch stream. This is being live streamed. Oh yeah, I should have checked with you all. Oh yeah, and yeah, we're publishing a VOD, as they call it, video on demand, I guess. So you can go and make your friends watch this, or you can watch it again. And yeah, so everyone should mingle. If I always feel like I am missing thanking someone, but if you should be thanked, I thank you. Yeah, feel free to mingle, talk with our panelists, talk with yourselves. You are free to no longer sit here quietly. Okay, bye.